Kick it. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. There's still seats up front for anyone who's not feeling shy. Good to see you all. For those I've not yet met, I'm Lynette Attai. I am here in my role as Project Director for COSN's Privacy Initiative and Trusted Learning Environment. And I would like to ask my panel if everyone could introduce themselves. Lucy, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm also a project director for COSN. I'm brand new, and my project is Digital Equity. I'm based in Chicago, and I've also led the Mobile Learning Initiative for COSN many years ago.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's Laura Pollock. I come from Nassau County in New York. Okay, my mic just. Okay, and I work for Nassau BOCES, which is also, okay, this keeps cutting out, a regional information center, and I supervise two services. We offer many services to support school districts, including mine, which is a collegiate group for tech directors and other K-12 technical professionals, and a data privacy and security service.
This will be fun, right? Yeah. Good morning. Bill Fritz. I'm the CEO at Learn21. We're a nonprofit in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Ohio COSN chapter, as well as my last few months at my school district. I'm retiring for about 25 years of being the technology director, so it's exciting. Some of you can't smile like I'm smiling, probably. It's a pleasure being here this morning.
Thanks, everyone. So we're going to start this off with a little bit of a poll. We'd like to hear from you. So if you could get out your phones, link to the QR code, and answer a few questions for us. That would be a great way to kick us off.
So hello, everybody. My name is Ari Kulai, and I am CDW Education Professional Development Manager, and I'm also the Gender Subcommittee Lead for COSN's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and Network Excellence. So it's definitely my honor to be here.
And my name is Tatu. I tell people it's like Gouda, but with a T, and that helps them remember it because it's spelled the same and sounds the same. I'm the Director of Member Engagement and Marketing for California IT and Education, or SITE, and previously I worked at the Irvine Unified School District as an IT analyst.
All right, so good morning. It's, still morning, had to check the time. I am Kelly Mae Vollmer, and I'm this.
I tell people, Ryan,
I turned off the other channel.
Oh, okay.
See what happens. If not, we're using our teacher.
I am the
That's great.
for digital learning
Okay.
for
let's
San
take
Bernardino
a
County
look.
Superintendent of Schools out in California.
Okay. I don't know if there's any, technology leader in the room, but we're going to find the official folks who understand what they did back there. So pay no attention to the woman behind the curtain, apparently. So what do you find most challenging about managing?
All right, so SITE is a nonprofit membership association. As mentioned, it stands for California IT and California IT and Education. Sorry, I should know this. I work for them, right? But so we support technologists in
Even though it's a
education. So that's
2-for-1
everything from
session today.
help desk technicians, network sysadmins.
We have gone to fetch the official COSN. So the other feed is getting
Association,
killed.
and prior to that, we were CEDPA, California
good life,
Educational
and we're
Data
gonna
Processing
put it out of its
Association.
misery.
I think I missed, we were established in 1960, so we got to celebrate our 60th year during the pandemic,
So,
unfortunately, but
what do we
we
find
made
most
up for it the
challenging?
following year.
Determining how to set boundaries when monitoring students, homeschool, ensuring that alerts get to a qualified individual in the district. This is an interesting one, and we're going to talk about this quite a bit today and give you some advice, we hope. Maintaining trust, huge, right? How do we be clear and transparent with our communities about what we're doing while still maintaining trust, not getting our students into a situation where they feel they can't be honest, they can't be open, parents feeling like we're surveilling. And then the 9% other, which will be interesting, and we'll see if we'll have some time for some Q&A with the group, and we will certainly be asking for your for your feedback there, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions. So let's get started and talk about, just kind of level set before I turn this over to the panel about what's going on in the environment. You're all here, you all know. We need to implement, for those schools who are getting E-rate funding for their internet access, you know that under SIPA, you need to be implementing an internet safety program, and it includes monitoring electronic communications. It's part of the requirement. How far you go with that is an area of some question, shall we say. Then, of course, in school systems, in the modern school systems, for some schools, we've had wearables, health devices. We've been taking temperatures in some schools, certainly in the past few years. So there's a perception, certainly, that we're maybe watching kids a lot in ways that we really hadn't done before, and creating this culture of surveillance as opposed to monitoring. Now, we've always watched kids, right? Kids are not on the playground unsupervised. They're not in classrooms unsupervised. But when we bring tech into the equation, it changes things. And certainly we've seen a lot of research, a lot of survey-based research, a lot of papers that have been written on the potential for unintended consequences of these types of monitoring technologies. Be it causing students to withdraw and to not feel that they can be honest in their school-based communications, to perpetuating bias and stereotypes, and really having an adverse impact on already vulnerable populations. So what we want to do today is unpack all of this and really turn our attention to, we know what the problems are. We know this technology can be used for harm. We know of districts that are getting alerts from this technology that things are going wrong, and they're calling law enforcement immediately and judiciously, pardon the pun. So let's talk a little bit, what we want to focus on today is not the problems, but how do we start thinking about how to create the right balance? How do we start to be more thoughtful, and what are the things we need to think about when implementing this technology? So with that as the setup, I want to turn it over to our experts, and I'm just going to ask everyone just to kick us off and tell us a little bit about the work that you do and your experience with these technologies, if it's applicable. And Lucy, again, we'll start with you because you've got the temperamental microphone.
And hopefully,
Nope.
hopefully it will, okay, so I guess I'm using my teacher voice. So my background is I've worked as a technology coach, educational technology director, and consultant with a number of schools, mostly independent schools. And in my last school, where I was fully employed, there was a tendency to not surveil students. They were very cautious.
Okay. So I honestly never thought I would work in technology.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I started my
everyone. I feel
career
like we
in
should
college
go
as a
with two of our
videographer. I worked in the
front
marketing
sessions or
office, and
something.
I pursued a degree in public relations. I went to Cal State Fullerton, go Titans. And so during my time there,
not surveilled by the government, but there was going to be more government involvement in the school if they chose to participate in E-rate. And so that mindset of, you know, whether we should be monitoring was not necessarily present there. And so public schools and private schools may have different kinds of things. So that's my profession, that's where I'm coming from in terms of my actual experience. As a project director for COSIN, we have two projects that we're working on for digital equity. And one of them is a digital equity dashboard that we've previewed here. Some of you may have seen it in the small and large school district workshops that took place on Sunday. And what I think is going to be really interesting with this is you'll be able to look at broadband coverage in your district when this dashboard comes out using publicly available data and correlate it with health data, for example, or other kinds of information that can give you clues into your population that you're working with. So for example, one of the examples that we brought up during the workshop was looking at depression, levels of depression, and who has access to that information via broadband, access to information that might help them via thoughtful ways based on data and not, and not in a way that's going to do any harm.
Laura?
So I'm very fortunate because I get a lot of feedback from all of the districts that I support. And there's certain, like I've heard that these products have saved lives and that can't be discounted at all. And therefore, I'm not saying don't use one. But when it's implemented, I think it's really important to determine who the crisis team is before you even consider installing it. Because just because your tech director is the one who helps you set it up, that doesn't mean they should be the one receiving alerts. And the stress and, concern that can put upon a person who is not trained to address a student in a mental health crisis, it cannot be understated, overstated. It's too much for them. So I think if it's going to be implemented, it has to be implemented with that in mind. Make sure there's a crisis team that can handle what gets flagged in place. And keywords are really important because you don't want to be flagging for words that can invade a student's privacy, that would, let's say it's an LGBTQ student who is looking for resources for themselves. That shouldn't necessarily be a red flag to contact parents and share information the student might not be ready to share information about yet. We want students to feel that their devices are a resource to them. It might be their only technical device in their life, so we don't want them to be afraid to use it. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we're addressing the right keywords and really helping students by using a program like this.
So just tell you a little bit about our district, 5,600 students, Southwest Ohio, Cincinnati area. About 12 years ago, started a one-to-one program, students taking home devices, putting a client on every machine, and starting to monitoring them. And that began the discussion around what does this bigger picture look like around monitoring and surveillance. And for a while it was just, we're doing it, being very transparent. That's what we do. I think the right thing was, and maybe some of you know this, is that when you did one-to-one, some people didn't even put a client on a machine and just sent them home. If you know someone, or maybe you just didn't have the ability to do that. We had the ability to do that, and we thought it was the right thing to do in implementation. But those are the starts, how we started our program about 12 years ago, and I'll kind of expand on that. But even to your points, Laura and Lucy, that we started to think strategically, what's the bigger picture look like for all of this? And as you know, where we are today. So,
Thank you, Bill. And could you just, since you've got the mic, dive in a little bit more deeply? Tell us what went right about implementation, what went wrong, what started you thinking about the need to take a step back and take a pause?
Yeah, it's good. So one more thing, right, is what I talk about a lot. I don't need one more thing. And you all, if you're in the CTO space or if you're in that management area of leading as well, you just don't want one more thing on your plate. And what happened was immediately when we sent devices home 12 years ago and had a monitoring a client on every device, I started to get the alerts, not only, and I'm just kind of taking one vertical here, I'm talking about just sending devices home. We can talk about bus camera surveillance, we can talk about a lot of things in this area of monitoring, but I'll take this example. I didn't want to have that on my plate all the time, nor did I feel like I was the right person to make the decision when an alert came that this student was searching on a certain aspect or certain item or category. If you kind of know what I'm talking about, maybe give some head nods or thumbs up, you know kind of what I'm talking about. And so we stepped back and we brought in the larger administrative team to start to talk about what's this look like, who should be involved. And again, I think it's just very what I call sensible to say you shouldn't have to own this. It should really be a situation that all people are involved. And I wasn't in a position where I was a counselor and I could make decisions about what does this really mean. And we talked even in our area regionally about well, if you get out an alert about a harm, you're responsible for reporting that alert. And maybe, you can go into some of that as well, but I felt like that's not my responsibility. We really need to provide a team together. And that is proven as we've grown more successful over the years. And they don't look at it as so much as tech, you own it, and I'm thankful for that. It's more around, I'm helping you understand what are those big challenges out there, and you can't promise that. We can't promise that technology unless that's, we can afford that, or is it really doable? So I'll kind of pause there. I don't know if that's kind of where you're getting at too.
That's great, thank you. And Lucy, we were talking earlier, Lucy and I, about just to dive in a little bit more deeply into the potential for things that could go wrong. And you told me a very interesting story about an Illinois school district.
This is actually a private school in Illinois. Recently was sued by parents for $150 million after their child died by suicide. And I believe the child had told the school, or had given some indication but I know it's in response to a law in Illinois where you're supposed to inform parents. And I think the parent piece on all of this is really crucial in terms of, this school was not monitoring, as far as I know, anything. And it's horribly tragic and that sort of thing, and nobody wants to see that sort of thing happen. And, would monitoring have prevented this? Maybe. So I think thinking about what the individual laws are in your state, what your liability is really, really crucial. I also think the parent piece, in terms of informing parents, this is what we're doing, this is how it works. We were talking to another person in the hall who said we had parents who didn't understand what we were actually looking at. They thought we were looking at everything. I also know in my experience at the school I last worked at, where we didn't do a lot of monitoring, we were a pre-K to 12 iPad school, and they definitely wanted something that kind of put the brakes on things for them in general. So I feel like this is the way that things have been going, and I've seen in the suburban districts in Chicago, all pretty much have something in place. But I think, again, it's being thoughtful about the team that you're putting together, as you said, thinking about the potential repercussions of this. At the particular school I worked at, it was really kind of antithetical to their belief about, I think they really wanted, digital citizenship type of behaviors to be taught in context and mirror real life. But things have changed, right? We are seeing increased mental health issues with children as a result of the pandemic and that sort of thing. So, what do we do? How do we balance, again, to your point, how do we balance all of this without being intrusive, using it as a safety tool in case something, happens?
Thank you for that. And I think one of the things we're hearing is, know your laws, right? Some of you have cyberbullying statutes where you have to be monitoring and reporting these things. Some of you have other stuff for you as part of your plan building, right? Before you present this to your community or with the input of community developing your plans. Laura, tell us a little bit more about some pitfalls and that you see most commonly in the Nassau area.
Well, I feel like when we have collegial circles about this, we kind of talk about the same issues, but don't necessarily have a full solution for it. I think we keep trying to find one. One of the pitfalls is, do you only monitor during the school day, or do you monitor when students are home and overnight? If it's overnight, someone has to be on call. Traditionally, educator contracts don't require people to be on call overnight. And that it could even be a union issue. And then, it's the legal concerns and the personal, emotional concerns. What if we miss something? What if it's 2 a.m. and we miss something and something terrible happens? Do I even want to know? Do I want to be put in that position? Which, is a very difficult position to be in, honestly. And at the same time, if you did monitor and you did get that alert and someone did respond We just know we don't know always how to handle it, but these are the questions that arise quite frequently.
To add to this, too, the liability piece, in this particular lawsuit situation, school administrators were part of the lawsuit and parents of the kids that did the bullying. And two of them were faculty children, or parents of children. They were on staff at the school. So, you know, if it's scary to think about that you could be held responsible, even if you're not necessarily directly involved with all this. Like, so thinking through what your tree is.
What your capacity
Yeah.
is. Yeah, go ahead.
So, one thing I didn't talk about a whole lot yet is the two-edged sword, I call it, is where you want to inform your community, but then when you inform your community, you open up the box that grow personally, and you grow, also find your advocates in the community that are understanding, but you will find your wild cards out there, that two-edged sword of a person or a parent that really wants to monitor everything about their child, and if you have access, they want to even go beyond. So that is challenging, very challenging. I don't have a good answer for that, but I believe that we've done well of annually having sessions for our parents to come to and learn about what we're monitoring, what are the tools, what they can get involved in the tools and be part of those. We have a tool that also allows them to restrict access off campus if they would like to. And sometimes they restrict it so bad that their child can't even do their work. So there's a lot to this whole conversation, but I believe if they walk out the door today with it's about engaging with the community and talking to them about what you're doing. But again, you better be ready for all the questions, and you may not have all the answers, so it's okay. You know.
Yeah, so great points here, really having your pulse, your finger on the pulse of your community, and thinking very carefully through this question of time and what are the hours within which you monitor, both for, I would say, you know, questions about are you overreaching by monitoring at night, or is that appropriate on the school device? And also, how are you going to staff that? A critical question. Does your SLA even provide for your provider to be available to help you with support services if something comes in at 2 a.m., and you need to unpack it further, you need to see more context than what's been provided. So really important things to be thinking about before engaging, or since you likely all have engaged, going back and putting on your committee list, and we'll talk about the idea of having a committee around this work because it is not your sole responsibility, to come up with some solutions for your district that are the equation there, or did it change the equation there?
Yeah, sure. So it did change it quite a bit, Lynette, and because where we were when the engagement of use of the tools, whenever students wanted to use those tools. And so we had to talk about flexing our department a little bit, quite frankly, and everybody likes it actually a little more about the flexibility in our work day, but it did push it outside of our box. Well, we're not in a space where my tech department was unioned. They weren't. They were exempt employees, so we had a lot of flexibility in how we were going to do this. So I was very fortunate in that respect, but it is something that we still grapple with today when something comes in on a Saturday morning. You know, and usually that's when it happens, excuse me, that it's a Saturday or a Sunday, and what is your chain of events then at that point? You know, what is the response plan, if you want to call about response plans? We like to use that word, those words, but that's what you have to think through a little bit. And reasonably, what we do as well is when we give out devices, we are giving those parents every year also additional training around all the things that were happening with monitoring on those devices. And so they know ahead of time a little bit about, not perfect, but our intent is you know more now than you did in the past, and we're here to help.
That's great. And Laura, what about you? What sort of, I mean, we've talked a certain amount about the problems, or I should say the challenges and opportunities to do better. So, so what are some of the things that you promote for your districts some advice that you might provide?
We frequently provide the advice, like before you even install it, have your response team in place. Make sure that you know, like, when things should be escalated to law enforcement. Make sure you know when parents should be contacted and who should be responding. Not the tech director. They should not be responding. Just setting it up. Another thing we talk about is community transparency. You know, making sure everybody knows what's going to happen before it happens, not after. Make sure there's buy-in from everyone, you know, like the parents and students, quite frankly. Like, they should know that, you know, this is for safety reasons and that, you know, for help. You know, they might actually want to reach out for help. And this is a way to do that if they know they can. And also making those choices. When do you monitor? Just, you know, have a plan, whether it's just during the school day or if it is also after school hours. Be very conscious of keywords so you're not targeting underrepresented groups with the keywords you're choosing. And then we actually, at one point, I actually had a tabletop exercise. You know how we do incident response, like cybersecurity tabletops? In one of my meetings, we did a alert, like a harm alert tabletops or student monitoring tabletop exercises, just to see what would you do if this occurred, and go through the process. So like you said, it's an incident response in its own way, and therefore you can simulate, you know, what the experience might be beforehand so it doesn't catch you off guard.
I love that idea of running an incident response playbook around crisis response here. For those of you who have been through a security incident, you know that the tabletop training is no prep for the real thing, but it does get your team ready and builds understanding of the types of questions that are going to come up and the ways in which you're going to need to work together. And so I think that's a great idea, is really just running a tabletop. And I would like to repeat what Laura said, which is the response is not the responsibility of the tech team. It is just not. That's not a group of people with different expertise, from your expertise to legal, to social workers, to administration, to really put this, to community input, to really put this plan together and keep it moving. But training, and I hope that when you do your tabletop exercises, it is always at 2 a.m. on a Saturday when the thing goes wrong, because that's kind of how it works, you know, or on spring break, so that you can start to troubleshoot the gaps and start to think about the thorny questions that are going to come up. When will you alert law enforcement? Will you call a parent at 2 a.m.? Is this search for a keyword okay? Right? And being very thoughtful, I love that idea, being very thoughtful about your keywords. It's an area of significant scrutiny right now because of the real or perceived concerns that it is targeting or highlighting students in already vulnerable populations and putting them really under undue scrutiny. Right? And so how you use your alerts matters tremendously. Bill, what else in terms of advice for the group?
Yeah, I would just say that in every situation, I always ask myself a couple questions. Do that to me, because how much can I really juggle on my plate? I'm just being realistic about it. But it will not be on your own if you do it correctly. Lynette, it's one of those where if you build a team and you are really getting people on the same page, you start to holistically talk about all surveillance and monitoring, not just, I mean, what I gave you is this one vertical around giving out devices, which I think is an easy one on low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But when we talk about what about the cameras in every single aspect of our buildings, you know, what are we doing there? And they're outside now on the playgrounds and on the such. Then we opened up the conversation further to talk about what about monitoring of staff? And what is that? And so, yes, this is an organic, it just continues to grow, this conversation, and as we see more about the laws and what the public responds to, This one will. It'll keep me longer than I probably wanted to, but it's a good way. I mean, these are about our kids and our staff and our buildings, but being reasonable around it as well. How much can we as a team really fix the world? And I'm not saying that in a flippant way. I think what we recognized is the world is a mean, nasty place, and there are some people that we just can't control everything, but what we're doing is our due diligence to provide a safe environment. And that's kind of that tipping point. And you're going to find people on your team that were all over how they feel about that, very engaged. And I think I heard Lucy and Laura, you kind of speak to it as well, that depending on the situation. So
The picture. And so what kind of training, what kind of parent education are you doing as a district as a whole? And as part of that, including what is involved with being a technologically savvy parent, and how things work and what the procedure is and what to expect from, if something is escalated. I think clear, consistent communication on this is really, 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 really important. And I'm all for kind of proactive parent education too, so that there's also some. We're combining the technical safety measures with the coaching that parents need to help their students grow to be, responsible digital citizens and users of technology.
Thank you for that. Two areas I wanted to emphasize. One is that parent piece so important, and for many of you, certainly for the Trusted Learning Environment SEAL recipients in the room, you've got a parent portal, a place on your website where you're providing cybersecurity tips, you're providing privacy tips. It's a great place to talk about this too. For those of you who are not doing it, it's a really easy thing to spin up on your website. It's just a page on your website for parents where you're talking to them about digital citizenship and how they can partner in raising tech-savvy kids, what they can think about in terms of privacy and security, how you're protecting the data. And this is part of it, right? How is this beneficial? The other thing that I'm hearing is, with respect to all the monitoring tools that we have at our disposal, one of the things you want to think about very carefully is, of course, access. Who has access to this information? Making sure it's secured. And data retention periods, right? How long are you keeping this? And that is a really important conversation to have with your legal team, because there are different thoughts related to liability. Do I keep it for a long time? Or if I keep it but I miss something, is that liability and I should get rid of it as soon as possible, right? So sensible data retention periods with respect to both privacy practices and legal concerns. We would like to now turn our attention to a couple of tips, and then I want to open up the floor for questions. So we promised we would give you some guidance, so here we go. We've broken it down into kind of 3 steps, right? First is define your program, right? What benefit, as with all technology, what are you hoping to gain from implementing this technology? Do you have a goal in mind? And how are you going to assess progress towards that goal? We should never be implementing technology without having a purpose for implementing the technology. And so even if this is already, the horse is out of the barn, let's take a step back and think about, what are we using this for? Is it meeting our objectives? What could improve? Is our provider able to work with us to tailor their services to meet our needs, whether it's allowing us really robust filtering of keywords, to service time availability? Are they a thoughtful partner with respect to how you assess their privacy practices and security practices? And then who's going to help define the implementation strategy? And again, not you, right? Not technology, not the job, not because you shouldn't be defining that, but because it's not your role and responsibility, and that is something where administration, superintendents should be really involved in the conversation. And what are the core questions that you need to consider, particularly given your community norms, the other surveillance you may already have in place, privacy practices, security practices, bias questions, in order to develop the implementation plan. Then you want to move to strategy. Do you actually have the resources to stand this up? If you already have this in place, How is this working with respect to existing resources? We know that everything is pushing the boundaries of existing resources. So how can we take a step back and think differently about it if that's what we need to do? How is the technology provider going to partner with you? How are you going to ensure that the results are not used for harm or any other unintentional adverse consequences? Very important. Data retention, I mentioned, access. Who's going to review the alerts? This is critical. Are they appropriately trained? Are they adequately trained? Are they qualified? Again, should not be really something that the technology leader is responsible for. That's not our world of social work. What's the escalation procedure? Who do you call when there is a crisis? When do you call them? When do you involve law enforcement? How quickly? In what circumstances? When do you call parents? You can start to map some of this out well in advance, things, triggers, thresholds for escalation. And who's responsible for documenting and enforcing policy and practice around the strategy? Because it all should be documented. Although check with your lawyer. So then communicate and reevaluate over time. How are you going to introduce the plan to your parents? Are you prepared for the questions, as Bill noted, that are going to come up? What objections might you anticipate? You know your communities. What does your new implementation committee going to anticipate in terms of questions and concerns and the wild card concerns that come up, as Bill alluded to? How are you going to communicate to your parents about how you're going to prevent harm to students by using this technology? How will it benefit? What are your legal requirements for using this technology? Don't forget about that, about articulating the requirements in law is part of your basis for some of this work. And then as you go, and for many of you, how are you measuring efficacy? Are you measuring it by the number of alerts, the number of incidents of harm or self-harm that have been prevented? Are you feeling like we're just monitoring so much and it's a lot of noise? Are you getting to the important things that really require a response, right? We don't want to monitor for the sake of monitoring, so what's our goal and are we meeting it? And how will you ensure over time that the implementation remains bound by the policies and practices that you've set up, or that those policies and practices are evolving with the times as they need to, going through an annual review, for example? So I would like to now just open up the floor to questions. I know that we may have a few notes in the group, so yes, please.
So a couple of questions I've been thinking about. I know in the medical field you've got the ability if you go and do something, the Good Samaritan law, you've at least attempted and tried to help. Is there any legislation, is there anything that relates to this as well? Because in essence, what we're trying to do is help alleviate a bad situation. And I don't know if there's anything out there, maybe something COSA can look into for safeguarding school districts who are just trying to do the best with what we have.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any, but certainly it's something we can look into, and maybe a question that we might pose to COSA, the Consortium of School Attorneys, to think about. I'm not aware of any federal legislation. States may be different. They're certainly hearing a lot about this, and there are certainly a lot of efforts to implement legislation not specifically directed at education, but to protect kids from harmful content and things of that sort. So I would imagine that's something on the horizon if it's not there already, and we can certainly look into that.
Great. Second question I have is, naturally, these tools have the ability, you can set a schedule. What's the ramifications from a legal standpoint? You decide that I'm not going to monitor after 7 o'clock in the evening and not on the weekends, when they come back and said you could have stopped a situation, but you chose not to. It's that double-edged sword that we talk about. It can go both ways. And have there been litigations going against a district who had monitoring but chose not to for X, Y, and Z reasons?
So I'm going to preface this response by saying I'm not a lawyer and I'm not your lawyer. So I think that it is a really important conversation. I don't mean to keep, fobbing this off on legal, but this is a really important conversation to have with legal. I think the story that Lucy told us earlier on about a situation in which a school or a district, private school, was alerted to, not through monitoring, but was told that something was going wrong and chose not to tell the parents and are now being sued is for $150 million, is one to watch. I think that this is a very important question to address with council. When do you monitor? How frequently do you monitor? How long do you retain the data? And what happens if we miss something? Choosing not to respond is a different action than missing something, right? And so understanding the boundaries of liability there, very important. Very important. And helping you make decisions and helping you make policy and then communicating to parents, this is what we're going to look for. We're not going to look for these other things, right? Making sure that your boundaries have been made clear, very important. But it's why those tabletops become such an important part of putting this together and identifying the gaps, because if you know something, you are compelled to act. Other questions? Yes?
Are there any specifics that have come up around behavior students or other IEP-based items on monitoring? Are they exempt from it? Do they have a different keyword set that's typically applied?
Laura or Bill?
I don't think there's anything specific on it. I do think once you use a monitoring system, you can't necessarily set the keywords per student. It's kind of like an overarching thing. However, it could be part of your response plan, meaning if you have students that have certain items indicated in their IEP that you can't, that you have to be aware of, and therefore don't necessarily need action in the same way as a student who doesn't have an IEP with that information. You would really streamline it in the response more than you would in the keyword setup.
So that's a really good question. Part of your team and part of the people that are involved in helping vet when these alerts come in. So we work with our Office of Student Services specifically when those come in. But I was thinking as we were all sitting here, a real life situation has happened where I get an alert, and when we first started a long, long time ago, it was like, all right, how do I vet this? How do I vet this? And we immediately recognized we need to have a series of questions that everybody agreed upon we would ask ourselves about this alert. And then that series of questions leads you down a flow chart. So I'm more visual sometimes about things, and I like a flow chart. And other people on the team that might be vetting a question could do the same with a flow chart. And when it also comes to an IEP student, we're like, okay, Office of Student Services, you need to tell us what we're supposed to do here. You own this section now. Tell us the better questions to look at and how we can vet it, because it might come in on a Saturday morning that immediately came. But in reality, that's the perfect situation that we work towards to get to, and that flow chart kind of changes. It's a really good question because the IEP kids, or the 504 or such, or behavioral, I don't know all the context, right, around it, like a high school counselor might know about that child. But I'm getting the alert that came in on my desk, so I've got maybe a flow chart to go through, and then I recognize that this is a high school challenged student. I need to pass it over here, and they need to look at it. But trying to do this in a timely manner, it's challenging. I don't know if I answered that well or not, but I had a question for you too, Lynette, about we are struggling transparently still with, even the other day, we have a new business ops person asking about how long we should keep some of these items around. And he wanted to keep them for a year, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do it a year. That's what I said. So I don't know how long if anybody in the crowd, how long you're retaining some of these records. And I don't think a year is a good answer, but I just kind of said, I don't think so.
Yeah, really important question. So a few things here. I think what Bill is speaking to is that the importance of being incredibly thoughtful about your escalation practices, right? And having that set of questions, that filter through which you view alerts when they come in, it's very important and something that you can map out now. Now, where that goes within your organization, right, it's just the first filter pass that goes through. And building that with your guidance counselors, your social workers, your student services team, whoever is responsible for that, and really making sure that they are aware and they have a really strong voice in developing those initial filters for your questions. With respect to data retention, as a privacy person, my answer is always get rid of it as soon as humanly possible. And certainly for privacy laws, the rule of thumb is you keep it for as long as it's needed for the purpose for which it was collected. However, there may be other legal considerations to ask, and this is an area, it's similar to alerts on a social website, right? There are real questions and legal philosophies about how long to keep that, and so it's important to consider. Yes, sir, in the back.
My district's been looking into this for a little bit now, and we've had several solution providers visit with us, and it seems to be a mixed bag on parent communication. There's some that recommend that they won't even configure it, and some have it configurable. The concern is the parent might be the reason that the kid is in the situation they're in. So just wanted to get your take on the parent communication.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? Are you being transparent with your community about the fact that you're doing this, or are you giving parents access to the results all day, all the time? And those are very, I think, community-driven concerns and probably local questions to be sussed out, but very important to consider. Laura and Bill, I'm curious about your guidance and experience around this.
Well, there's multiple vendors out there that provide solutions. Some have live people who review the results and will contact you if they see something they feel requires the phone call or the contact with whoever is designated to be contacted. Others don't have live people yet. They're all using AI of some kind to sort through what they are filtering. And then some have a parent option that you can then push notifications to parents, or you can let them view results. And so far, I think there's a hesitancy to go down that road. Not that it's bad to, but it definitely requires a lot of thought and preparation, policy, procedure, transparency with the community. The students, I don't know how they feel about it. As a student, I don't know how I'd feel about my parents seeing the results of what I do on a device. I feel like my kids are so over-monitored as it is. Like, I always know where they are because I can find my phone. They can't say I'm sleeping over my friend's house and go over there. They kind of lost out in that. So
Age matters.
It does. I do. I feel a little bad for them. They can't ever get away with anything. So, do they need that at home and at school too? I don't know. These are really real conversations. The students are in this too. And I think that's something to consider.
Now, I'm on page, I rode my bike all over the neighborhood. My mom didn't know where I was. So, but we have really, to your question about parent, we felt as though we weren't going to have a solution provider that was going to make that call for us. We actually looked at it, and we knew that who knows the child best in the local building, talk to those counselors, and then they know the relationship of the parents. So it's part of my comment earlier about this is going to take you farther than you wanted to go and keep you longer than you wanted to stay. This is the lift, but it is about our student well-being. And a lot of our work now is around that so they can be a more successful student in their studies. And so it is, we erred on working with our local team and do communicate with the parents. Now, I will tell you, I have a student I know personally that is a phenomenal kid, but his mom is just always on our case about wanting monitoring, and it's a heavy for us all the time. And I've gotten to the point where our superintendent has gotten involved and said, you need to back off. So they're all involved. So it goes back to the team concept of everybody knows what's happening, it's just not tech.
We have one more question. I know it's time for break, so we got one more we're going to squeeze in.
This is going to be rather unpopular, because I am a parent of a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old boy, and I want to know everything about their life. And I have to, with all due respect, because I'm also working in the school district, you know, I have to think, what is so important in monitoring that you're going to be alerted that I shouldn't be? You know, that troubles me a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you need to think about and consider with your team. Yes, sir, back there.
I was just going to say, it'd be a good discussion later at the LGBTQ mixer and that sort of thing too, which is, I work for a vendor. We discussed for a year the idea of turning on all sites that kids go to for the parent portal. We made the decision not to. We only show the block sites. And the reason for that is students who are questioning sexuality, students who are going through a rough time, students who have abusive households have some sort of right to privacy to be able to explore those without their parents seeing everything that they're doing. So I would just say, because a vendor creates the button doesn't mean that you should click the button. And there are so many decisions that need to be made that affect individual students, 1 out of 10,000, but are so critical and important. So that's
Well said, very well said, and yeah, absolutely. This is not one person's decision. It is something that really needs to be understood and unpacked. You know, we need our students to trust their teachers, their administrators, the entire school staff as being a safe place for them. And so this is part of that responsibility of care that we have, not to stand in the shoes of the parent, not to replace a parent, but to be thoughtful about what this means before we push the button, right? Just because it's there, as you said, doesn't mean we have to use it. I'm going to end on that note. We're going to be around for questions later on. Thank you all very much. The slides are in the portal, I think.